A dog waits for its owner for 9 years at a train station. Hello, welcome to Best Recaps. On this occasion, I'll recap Hachiko, a movie based on the life of an Akita dog named Hachiko. Due to circumstances, a professor finds and raises the dog until one day, the man has an incident and the dog, not knowing what happened, waits for him day and night. So, we'll recap this movie to learn more about Hachiko and his relationship with Parker. The movie starts in a class where students describe their hero. One of them, Ron, mentions his grandfather had a dog named Hachiko, who was mysterious to the family because they didn't know where he came from. The story shows that in reality, Hachiko lived in Japan and had an owner, but the man couldn't live with him, so he sent him, possibly to a relative. The puppy arrived at the airport and ended up in the US. As he was sorting his packages, the address was broken. After leaving the train station, he slipped and fell. When he opened his eyes, the puppy walked aimlessly and was found by Parker, Ron's grandfather, who picked him up and tried to leave him at the station in case his owner appeared, but the manager wouldn't allow it, warning him that if he left the dog, he would take him to the pound as soon as he had time. So, Parker took him home before meeting his wife, Kate. He hid the dog, but it was so restless that it went up to the room, and his wife got angry when she saw it because she didn't allow animals in the house. This made Parker promise that he would take the dog to the station the next day to look for its owners. He then put the dog in a tool room and went back home. The next day, his daughter Andy arrived and fell in love with the dog, asking her father to keep it, but he told her that her mother didn't want to see it in the house. Later, Parker went to the pound, but the manager wouldn't accept him. Later, Parker visits his friend Miriam, but her cat tries to attack him. This causes Parker to take care of the puppy and start putting up notices to find its owners. Later, he arrives at the station and the manager tells him that no one came for it, so he gave him a notice to put in that location. Then he heads to his class, carrying the puppy. After that, he visits his friend, who tells him the animal's name and that it's a special breed called Kita. Additionally, there's a symbol on its collar that means hatch, which is the number 8 for good luck. He advises Parker not to give it to someone else because it appeared in his life. Later, Parker returns home and tells his wife that he couldn't find the puppy's owner, but he found out its name is Hatch. This angers his wife because she sees that her husband wants to keep it. While they continue to argue, Hatch destroys Kate's model, causing her to get angry and tell her husband she never wants to see the animal in the house again. Parker takes the puppy to the tool room to sleep, but later regrets it and brings it back home to sleep on the furniture. Later, his wife finds out and he asks for just one more night with Hatch. The next day, he starts training the puppy while someone contacts Kate to adopt it. But when she sees Parker and his daughter playing with it, she decides to keep it. Months later, Hatch is settled in the house while Parker goes to work. Desperation to keep going doesn't make them dig the ground and chase after him. Minutes later, he arrives at the train station, and when Parker sees him, he quickly gets off and orders him to return. But as the dog doesn't listen to him, Parker decides to go back with him, missing the train. Back at the house, Parker covers up the hole where Hatch escaped and then goes to work. Hours later, the dog jumps over the fence and follows the path that Parker used. Then he sits in front of the train station entrance waiting. Moments later, Parker comes out and is happy to see him, surprised to know that Hatch had arrived minutes earlier. They both then return home. Hours later, Andy comes home with his boyfriend Michael, and the young man tries to play with Hatch, but the dog ignores him. Parker tells him to go get the ball himself, as Hatch obeys only him. Later, Parker finds out that dogs don't care about pleasing their owners and only come to the station because they have a special connection with them. But he adds that the dog would only listen to him if there was a special reason. The next day, Parker decides to take Hatch to the station and orders him to return home and take the train. The dog obeys, and hours later, he returns to wait for him in the same place. The same thing happens in the following weeks and months. Time passes, and one day when Parker leaves the station, he finds Hatch and quickly goes to find his husband, realizing that he hadn't seen him either. He turns around all the streets, and when he finds out, he returns home, finding out that the dog was in the tool room and couldn't get out because the entrance was blocked by a skunk. He tries to help him escape, but on the way, he trips and both of them end up sprayed with urine. Hours later, his husband arrives and finds both of them in the bathtub. Months pass, and Angie tells her parents that she will have a baby. One day when Parker goes to work, Hatch starts barking for no reason. trying to find out what's wrong, but he can't calm him down. He doesn't call him to come along. But as the dog doesn't move, Parker decides to go alone. Hatch then returns to the tool room, gets his ball, and decides to follow his owner. When he reaches the station, he delivers it to him to play with. When Parker throws the ball, it amazes the man, as the dog had never done that before. Before leaving, Hatch starts barking nonstop, so Parker hugs him and goes, unable to calm him down. At the university, he starts telling his students a story while holding Hatch's ball. Suddenly, he starts feeling sick and sits on one of the benches. His pain increases, and he ends up fainting. Hours pass and Hatch, the dog, arrives at the train station entrance to wait for his owner. Despite the lateness of the hour and Parker not showing up, Hatch stays in the same place. The workers who know him become worried and say goodbye before leaving. Later, Michael arrives and picks up Hatch, locking him in the tool room. The next day, Andy visits and remembers the massages his father used to give him while shedding a few tears. Then he leaves with his husband, promising to come back. The family is in mourning as they attend Parker's funeral at the cemetery. Jackie arrives at the train station to wait for her owner, staying until late just like the day before. Moments later, the station manager tells her that Parker won't be coming back, saying goodbye and telling her to do what she has to do. Days pass and Kate prepares to move, letting Andy and his husband take Hatch. Months go by and Andy's baby grows. Suddenly, Michael opens the door and Hatch escapes, following the train route to the station and waiting until the next day. The sound of the train awakens him in the morning, so Hatch continues on his journey to his old home. Upon finding new people there, he quickly escapes the place. Advancing along the route that Parker walked to reach the train station entrance, sitting on the wall to wait for him, Andy suddenly arrives with his husband and takes him away. Later, Hatch tries to leave the house, so Andy understands and opens the gate for him to return to the train station so he won't be sad. The dog arrives at the place despite the bad weather and returns at night, staying to sleep under a train car. The next day when he waits on the wall, a female dog approaches him, but he still doesn't move. Moments later, a man arrives at the station and tells the manager that he's a journalist and wants to know more about Hachiko, as many people are talking about him. Then the dog approaches and takes some photos. The next day, instead of Hachiko, it appears in the newspaper mentioning that the dog awaits the return of his deceased owner, causing people to start sending him food. When he goes to visit him, he tries to help, but the vendor who knows him won't accept it, telling him that Hachiko has the support of everyone every day. Then the dog approaches and tells him that a year has passed, adding that Parker won't return, but if he wants to wait, he won't say anything. The next day, the dog returns to the same place, and this continues for weeks and years. One day, it is the place to visit the grave of his husband. Minutes later, it appears that 10 years have passed and he tells the woman. On the other hand, old Hachiko heads slowly to the station where you see him, and approaches finding himself not looking directly at the entrance, so I hugged him and he begins to cry, lamenting that they don't know the truth. The days pass and he shows his grandchildren an album of photos where Hachiko is sharing how the dog found his grandfather. Meanwhile, Hachiko settles down to sleep, getting up and walking slowly to the station from time to time, settling on the wall and observing the entrance. Then he begins to remember all the moments when he was happy with his owner. Suddenly, Parker exits the station and Hachiko jumps on him, but these are only memories before taking his last breath. Randy mentions that he didn't know his grandfather because he died when he was a baby, but from what he was told about him and Hutch, he learned what loyalty is and that one should never forget someone they love. Concluding that he will always be his hero, when he leaves the school, his father is waiting for him with a puppy, which he also named Hatch. The real Hachiko was born in Japan in 1923, when his owner, Dr. Saburo, died in 1925. Patsy returned to the train station the next day and did so for 9 years. Hachiko died in March 1934. Today, there is a statue of Hachiko in his place at the entrance of Shibuya train station, ending the movie. The explanation of the end shows the love that Hachiko felt for Parker, perhaps out of gratitude for raising him, or maybe as he said there was a connection between them. What we do know is that many dogs would do something similar if their owner were to be missing, even to the point of dying of grief. Hachiko patiently waited for someone who was never going to arrive just before his death. We imagine this as the greatest wishes of any living being on the verge of losing life. So we assume he didn't die sad and possibly found him in the afterlife for those who believe that the soul never dies. On the other hand, they show us the importance of animals in our lives, giving us joy and feeding our soul. We should raise awareness that they are not objects and should not be mistreated because they also feel, they just lack the ability to speak and reason. They also teach us to love and forgive. A highly recommended movie.